The dusty horizon of the New Mexico territory seemed to shimmer like a mirage as Aurora Andrews wiped sweat from her brow, her shovel biting into the parched earth of Las Animas Valley. It was 1876, 2 years since she had arrived in this desolate place with nothing but a wagon full of saplings and a dream that most folks called madness. Aurora's hands were blistered and raw, her fair skin bronzed by the relentless sun despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. 24 years old and stubbornly determined, she had defied her father's wishes back in Boston to pursue what he called a fool's errand in a lawless wasteland. But Aurora saw potential where others saw only barren emptiness. "You'll die out there," they had warned her. "That land won't grow nothing but heartache." Yet here she was, planting her 37th cottonwood sapling of the day, her wagon nearby with dozens more. The previous year's plantings had mostly withered away, but a precious few had survived, their spindly branches a testament to her persistence. Her small cabin stood a quarter-mile away near the creek that had drawn her to this particular stretch of valley. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude, but you might be the strangest sight I've seen in these parts." Aurora startled at the deep voice, nearly dropping her shovel as she whirled around. A man sat atop a chestnut stallion, regarding her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see he was handsome in a weathered way, with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he spoke. "And you, sir, might benefit from announcing your presence rather than startling a lady at her work," Aurora replied, straightening her spine. The man swung down from his horse with practiced ease. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bleached brown hair and a short beard that failed to hide a strong jawline. His clothes were trail-worn but well-kept, and the six-shooter at his hip looked like a natural extension of his body. "Forgive me," he said, removing his hat and revealing a full head of sandy hair. "Finn Irwin, madam. I've been riding for the Rocking T Ranch about 20 miles north." He glanced at the small tree she had just planted. "May I ask what you're doing?" "I should think that's obvious, Mr. Irwin." "I'm planting trees. In the middle of the driest valley in the territory." His tone wasn't mocking, merely curious. Aurora squared her shoulders. "This land needs trees, Mr. Irwin. For shade, for windbreaks, for soil. For the future." He studied her for a moment, then looked around at the vast, empty landscape. A few scraggly trees stood along the distant creek bed, but otherwise the valley stretched out barren and unforgiving. "You planted those survivors too?" he asked, nodding toward her earlier attempts that had somehow endured. "Yes, last spring." "And how many did you plant to get those few that lived?" Aurora hesitated. "Nearly 200. Finn Irwin whistled low. "That's a powerful lot of work for mighty little return, Miss Andrews." "Aurora Andrews. Miss Andrews." He nodded, then looked at her wagon full of saplings. "You planning on planting all those today, as many as daylight allows?" Finn walked to the nearest sapling she'd planted and knelt beside it, examining the shallow basin she'd formed around it. "You're losing most of your water to the sun," he observed, "and these need deeper holes to encourage the roots downward." Aurora bristled. "I assure you, Mr. Irwin, I've studied." "No offense meant," he said, standing and dusting off his hands. "Just an observation. My pa was something of a tree man back in Tennessee." Aurora remained silent, her pride slightly wounded. Finn looked up at the merciless sun, then back at her reddened face and neck. "Miss Andrews, those trees aren't the only things in danger of withering out here." He walked to his horse and unhooked a second canteen. "Here, you need this more than I do." She accepted it reluctantly, taking a small sip before trying to hand it back. "Keep it," he insisted. "I'm heading back to town anyway." He returned to his horse, and Aurora felt a strange disappointment. Most folks who passed through either thought her mad or simply ignored her entirely. At least this cowboy had shown interest. Finn adjusted his saddle, then paused, looking thoughtfully at the wagon of saplings. "You know," he said slowly, "I wasn't planning on doing much this afternoon." He turned to face her. "I reckon your trees might stand a better chance if they had twice the attention. I'll water them with you if you'll permit the help." Aurora blinked in surprise. "You want to help me plant trees, in this heat, for no payment?" A smile spread across his face, reaching all the way to his eyes. "Well, I wouldn't say for no payment. You could tell me what possessed a clearly educated Eastern lady to come all the way out here to plant trees in a place most folks say God forgot." For the first time that day, Aurora felt her lips curve into a genuine smile. "That, Mr. Irwin, is quite a long story." "I've got time," he said, removing his coat and rolling up his sleeves. "And please call me Finn." As the afternoon sun beat down on them, Aurora found herself working alongside the cowboy, digging deeper holes as he had suggested and creating wider basins around each sapling. Finn fetched water from the creek, carefully watering each newly planted tree. "So, Miss Andrews," he said as they worked, "about that story." Aurora paused, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "My father is a shipping merchant in Boston, quite successful. He wanted me to marry a business associate of his, a man 30 years my senior with 3 previous wives." "3?" Finn raised an eyebrow. "Divorce or widower?" "Widower, though there were whispers about the last one." Aurora shrugged. "In any case, I refused. My mother had passed 2 years before, leaving me a modest inheritance. Rather than submit to my father's wishes, I decided to forge my own path." "Which led you here?" Finn gestured to the barren landscape. Aurora smiled. "Not directly. I had read about the Homestead Act and about forestry experiments in Nebraska. I was fascinated by the idea of transforming landscapes. I traveled west, first to St. Louis, then to Denver, learning what I could about trees that might survive in arid conditions." "And why Las Animas? There's greener places in the territory." Aurora's expression grew more animated. "Because this is where it's needed most. The railroad is coming through soon. More settlers will follow. Without trees, this valley will only grow more barren with time as people cut what little timber remains for buildings and fuel." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "So you're not just planting trees, you're planting a future." "Precisely," Aurora said, surprised and pleased by his understanding. They continued working, and Aurora found herself telling him more about her journey west, about the small inheritance that had funded her dream, about the locals who thought her eccentric at best and dangerously foolish at worst. "The station master in town takes bets on when I'll give up and head back east," she admitted. Finn chuckled. "And what are the current odds? Last I heard, most money was on before the first snow." "And what would you bet?" Finn asked, his eyes serious despite his smile. Aurora straightened, looking out at the saplings they had planted. "I'd bet on forever, Mr. Irwin, or at least until this valley has enough trees to cast shade for generations to come." As the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, they had planted nearly 30 trees together, each one with a deeper hole and better water basin than Aurora had managed on her own. "I should head back to town before dark," Finn said reluctantly, wiping his hands on his trousers. Aurora nodded, suddenly aware of how much she had enjoyed his company. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Irwin. The trees and I are both grateful." "Finn," he reminded her. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Andrews." "Aurora," she offered in return. He smiled, putting on his hat. "Aurora." He said her name like he was testing the feel of it on his tongue. "Like the dawn. My mother was an astronomer's daughter, she explained. She had a fondness for celestial names. It suits you. Finn mounted his horse, then hesitated. I'll be in Las Animas for another week or so, before heading back to the ranch. He paused. Perhaps I could call on you again, to check on the trees, of course. Aurora felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. The trees and I would both welcome the company. As she watched him ride away, Aurora realized she was smiling. For the first time in months, the loneliness of her self-appointed task felt a little less overwhelming. She turned back to her saplings, adjusting the soil around one that looked a bit crooked. "Well," she murmured to the little tree, "that was unexpected." 3 days later, Aurora was startled by the sound of hoofbeats approaching her cabin in the early morning. She had just finished her breakfast and was preparing to head out to check on the newly planted trees before the day's heat became too intense. Finn Irwin dismounted before her cabin, leading not only his chestnut stallion but also a sturdy mule loaded with wooden barrels. "Good morning, Aurora," he called, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Mr. Irwin," she responded, stepping onto her small porch. "This is a surprise." "Finn," he corrected gently, "and I said I'd be back to check on the trees. I didn't expect you quite so soon." He patted the barrels on the mule's back. "I had an idea after I left, rode all the way to Hawkins' cooperage in town and commissioned these." Aurora stepped closer, curious. "What are they?" "Water barrels," Finn explained, "but I had Hawkins modify them. Look here." He showed her how each barrel had a small spigot near the bottom and a removable lid. "We can position these near clusters of your saplings. They'll hold enough water to last a week or more, depending on how you ration it." Aurora stared at the barrels, then at Finn. "You did this for my trees." His confident expression faltered slightly. "Well, yes, I thought. Was it presumptuous?" "No," Aurora said quickly, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's brilliant. I've been carrying buckets from the creek every day. This will save hours of work." Relief washed over his face. "Good. I brought 6 for now. If they work well, we can get more." "We?" Aurora raised an eyebrow. Finn's sun-brown cheeks darkened slightly. "Figure of speech. Unless that is, you'd welcome the help setting these up," Aurora smiled. "I would indeed." They spent the morning strategically placing the barrels among the groves of saplings, filling them from the creek, using Finn's ingenious idea of a modified pump he had brought along. By midday, they had created 6 water stations that would make Aurora's daily tasks significantly easier. As they shared a simple lunch of cornbread and dried apple slices that Aurora had prepared, she studied her companion with growing interest. Unlike the rough cowboys who occasionally passed through Las Animas, Finn spoke with a quiet eloquence that suggested education beyond the typical frontier schoolhouse. "You mentioned your father was from Tennessee," Aurora said. "How did you end up in New Mexico territory?" Finn nodded, taking a sip from his canteen. "Pa was a farmer who loved trees, had this notion that every piece of land could be improved with the right plantings. After the war, he fought for the Union. Things weren't easy for him back home, so we headed west when I was 16. "And your mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost her to fever when I was 12. It was just Pa and me after that." "I'm sorry," Aurora said softly. "Is your father with the Rocking T Ranch as well?" Finn shook his head. "Pa passed 4 years ago. Pneumonia took him one winter. He'd bought a small parcel near Santa Fe, had started an orchard." His voice grew quieter. "I couldn't keep it going alone, so I sold it and took up cowboying. Been with the Rocking T since." Aurora felt a new connection forming between them. "So you understand," she said, "about the trees." "I do," he admitted. "When you told me what you were doing out here, it reminded me of Pa. He used to say, son, anyone can use up what's already here. It takes vision to create something that'll outlive you. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Finn smiled at the memory. He'd have liked you, probably would have helped you plant this entire valley. They fell into a comfortable silence, looking out at the saplings that now had a fighting chance thanks to their morning's work. What made you come back? Aurora asked finally. Finn met her gaze, his blue eyes earnest. Honestly, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you're doing here. Most folks come west looking to take something gold, land, opportunity, but you. He gestured toward the trees. You're giving something, creating something. It's rare. Aurora felt her cheeks warm, and it wasn't from the sun. Most people think I'm just a stubborn fool. Maybe, Finn agreed with a grin. But the world needs more stubborn fools with vision, if you ask me. Over the next 2 weeks, Finn returned almost daily. Sometimes he brought additional supplies, more water barrels, lengths of canvas that could provide shade for the most vulnerable saplings, even several books on forestry that he had somehow procured from a bookseller in Santa Fe. They fell into an easy routine, working together in the mornings and early evenings when the heat was less intense. During the hottest part of the day, they would retreat to the shade of Aurora's small cabin porch, where she would read aloud from the forestry books while Finn whittled small wooden markers to identify different species of trees. Aurora learned that Finn wasn't just a cowboy. He had a keen mind that absorbed information quickly, could recite poetry he'd learned from his father, and had an unexpected knowledge of botany gleaned from his years helping with his father's orchard. The ranch foreman's expecting me back next week, Finn mentioned one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of orange and purple. Spring roundup will be starting soon. Aurora felt a sudden hollowness in her chest. She had grown accustomed to his company, to their shared work, to the sound of his laughter. I see, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Will you be gone long? At least a month, maybe 2, he replied. But I've been thinking. Aurora waited, heart quickening despite her efforts to remain composed. This valley, Finn continued, gesturing to the landscape before them. It's got good water with that creek, decent soil in places. It's the exposure that's killing most of your trees, too much sun, too much wind. Yes, Aurora agreed, wondering where he was leading. What if we created windbreaks first, strategic plantings of the hardiest species in lines that would shield later plantings? Aurora's mind raced with the possibilities. That could work. The cottonwoods along the creek manage because they're somewhat protected by the bank. Exactly. Finn's eyes were alight with enthusiasm. And what if we focus on expanding outward from those natural protected areas? Work with the land instead of trying to transform it all at once. We. Aurora repeated, echoing their earlier conversation. Finn turned to face her directly. Aurora, I've been thinking about this a great deal. What you're doing here matters. I'd like to be part of it if you'll have me. As what? Aurora asked, hardly daring to hope what his answer might be. As a partner, I suppose. I've saved most of my wages these past years. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to buy more saplings, better equipment. Maybe even hire some help from town during planting season. Aurora stared at him, stunned by the offer. Finn, you barely know me. He laughed softly. I know enough. I know you're stubborn, determined, brilliant. I know you care about creating something meaningful. And I know that every day I've spent helping you with these trees has felt more right than anything I've done since Pa died. Aurora looked away, overwhelmed by his words and by the emotions rising within her. What about your job at the Rocking Tea? I'll fulfill my obligations for the spring roundup. After that, he shrugged. There are ranches closer to Las Animas where I could find work when we need additional funds. Or I could try my hand at something in town. You would change your entire life. For trees. For me was the unspoken question. Finn's expression grew serious. For a purpose I believe in, and he hesitated, then seemed to find his courage. For a woman who has shown me that there are still dreamers in this world worth following. Aurora's breath caught. Over these past weeks, she had felt something growing between them, something tender and unexpected. But she hadn't dared to name it, or to hope that he felt it too. I should be clear, Finn said softly. My interest isn't just in your trees, Aurora. No, she whispered. No. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably proper. Aurora looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller but equally calloused from hard work. I've thought about you too, she admitted. The valley around them had grown quiet as twilight deepened. In the distance, an owl called, beginning its nightly hunt. I have to leave tomorrow, Finn said. But I'll come back if you want me to. Aurora met his gaze. I do want you to, he smiled, and in the fading light, Aurora thought he had never looked more handsome. Then I'll return, and perhaps by then you'll have decided if you're willing to have a partner in this grand vision of yours. Perhaps I will, Aurora replied, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the possibility. As promised, Finn departed the next morning for the rocking tea ranch. The 6 weeks that followed were some of the longest of Aurora's life. She threw herself into caring for her trees, implementing the windbreak strategy they had discussed. She ordered more saplings, using some of her dwindling funds, and prepared the ground for their arrival. In town, she began to notice a subtle shift in how people treated her. The station master, who had once openly laughed at her tree planting venture, now asked genuine questions about her progress. The general store owner extended her credit when her funds ran low, saying, Finn Irwin vouched for you, said you're doing important work out there. It seemed Finn had been speaking about her project around town, describing it not as the foolish dream of an Eastern girl, but as a visionary undertaking that deserved respect. Spring gave way to early summer. The days grew longer and hotter, but Aurora persisted. To her delight, the survival rate of her newer plantings, those done with Finn's improved methods, was noticeably higher. Nearly 70% were showing new growth, compared to less than 30% from her earlier attempts. On a scorching day in late June, Aurora was examining a particularly promising young elm when she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leapt as she turned to see Finn approaching, his chestnut stallion kicking up dust along the path. He looked thinner, more weathered after weeks on the range, but his smile was as bright as ever when he spotted her. You came back, she said as he dismounted. I said I would. His eyes roamed over her face as if memorizing her features. You look well. As do you. Tired, though. Finn chuckled. Roundup is never easy, but worth it for the return. He looked past her to the saplings. They're growing, Aurora nodded proudly. The windbreak strategy is working, and the water barrels have made all the difference. They walked among the trees, Aurora pointing out the progress and changes she had made in his absence. Finn listened attentively, occasionally offering suggestions or asking questions. I've been thinking, he said as they made their way back toward her cabin. What if we built a small dam on the creek, create a reservoir to ensure water even during the driest months? We would need permission from territorial authorities, Aurora mused. And materials, expertise. I met a fellow during Roundup who worked on irrigation projects in California. Said he's heading this way soon. I invited him to stop by. Aurora shook her head in amazement. You've really been planning this? Every night while I was away, Finn confirmed. "I've made my decision, Aurora. If you'll have me, I want to be part of this project, part of transforming this valley." They had reached her cabin, and Aurora turned to face him directly. "And if my answer is yes, what exactly are you proposing, Finn Irwin?" His expression grew more serious. "First, a business partnership. I have $300 saved. I'd invest it all in our tree venture. And second—" Aurora prompted, her heart racing. Finn took a deep breath. "Second, I'm proposing that we get to know each other better, properly, with the intention of—" He faltered, then found his resolve. "With the intention of courtship, if you're amenable." Aurora couldn't help but smile at his formal phrasing. "You want to court me while we plant trees together? When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous," Finn admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "Not ridiculous," Aurora said softly. "Wonderful." Hope blazed in Finn's eyes. "Is that a yes?" "To the partnership, certainly. As for the courtship—" Aurora pretended to consider, though her mind was already made up. "I believe I would be amenable to that arrangement as well." Finn's smile could have lit the darkest night. "You won't regret it, Aurora Andrews. Together, we'll make this valley green again." "I believe we will," she replied, and for the first time since arriving in Las Animas, Aurora felt the full weight of her isolation lift from her shoulders. The following months transformed both the valley and their relationship. True to his word, Finn invested his savings into their tree planting venture. They purchased better tools, hired local Mexican and indigenous workers for the heavier tasks, and expanded their nursery area near the creek. Finn found work at a nearby ranch that allowed him to return to Aurora's homestead each evening. They developed a reputation in Las Animas as the tree folk, eccentric perhaps, but increasingly respected as their results began to show. By late fall, they had planted over 500 trees in strategic locations throughout the valley. The dam project was underway, supervised by the California irrigation expert Finn had met, a gruff man named Jebediah, who had initially scoffed at their vision but quickly became an enthusiastic supporter. Their courtship progressed alongside their work. Finn proved to be as dedicated a suitor as he was a tree planter. He brought Aurora wildflowers, carved wooden trinkets, and most precious of all, seeds and cuttings from rare trees he discovered on his rides across the territory. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch, planning the next day's work while watching the sunset. Sometimes they read together from Aurora's growing collection of forestry books, or Finn would recite poetry his father had taught him. Aurora found herself falling deeply in love with this thoughtful, hard-working man who shared her vision and treated her dreams with respect instead of derision. One crisp November evening, as they sat wrapped in blankets watching the stars emerge above the valley, Finn took her hand. "I've been thinking," he began, a phrase that Aurora had come to recognize as the prelude to one of his ideas. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. He smiled. "Indeed, but hear me out. Winter's coming. Work on the trees will slow." "Yes," Aurora agreed. "Though we'll need to protect the younger saplings from frost." "We will," Finn said, "but I was thinking of something else." He shifted to face her more directly. "Aurora, these past months have been the happiest of my life, working alongside you, watching our vision take shape." Aurora's breath caught as she sensed the direction of his words. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I saw you standing alone in this valley, stubbornly planting trees where everyone said nothing would grow." "Finn," Aurora whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "I know our arrangement was for courtship with no specific timeline," he continued, "but I find myself unwilling to wait any longer to ask." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate leaf patterns. Aurora gasped softly as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a small emerald. "It was my mother's," Finn explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for a woman who could see beauty where others couldn't." He took a deep breath. "Aurora Andrews, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Aurora's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Finn Irwin, I will marry you." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her hand. "We'll be married in the spring," Aurora decided, "when the trees are budding." "I'd marry you tomorrow if I could," Finn said, drawing her into his arms. "Patience," Aurora reminded him with a smile. "As we've learned with our trees, the best things take time to grow." The winter of 1876-77 was harsh, with biting winds and occasional snow that tested both their relationship and their saplings. They lost some of the younger trees despite their protective measures, but the majority survived, their bare branches standing stark against the winter sky like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Aurora and Finn spent the cold months planning not just for their wedding, but for the future of their valley. They drew maps, ordered more saplings for spring planting, and began construction on a larger cabin that would become their marital home. Word of their project spread beyond Las Animas. A professor from a Colorado agricultural college visited to observe their methods. A reporter from a Denver newspaper wrote a small piece about the tree woman of Las Animas and her cowboy partner, painting their effort as a romantic quest to tame the wilderness. The attention brought unexpected support. Seeds and cuttings arrived by mail from sympathetic readers. A wealthy Boston businessman, intrigued by the newspaper story, sent a substantial donation to further the greening of the West. Through it all, Aurora and Finn's bond deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, strengths, and weaknesses. Aurora came to rely on Finn's practical knowledge and steady determination, while he marveled at her scientific approach and unflagging optimism. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright in early April 1877. True to Aurora's wish, they married among their trees, which were just beginning to show the first green buds of spring. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by the workers who had helped with their project, townspeople from Las Animas who had come to respect their vision, and even a few cowboys from the rocking T who rode in to support their former colleague. Judge Thornton from Las Animas presided, beaming at the couple as they exchanged vows beneath the spreading branches of the largest cottonwood along the creek, one of Aurora's first successful plantings. "I take you, Aurora Andrews, to be my wife," Finn said, his voice clear and steady. "I promise to nurture our love as we nurture this land, to stand beside you through drought and plenty, and to help grow the vision we share for as long as we both shall live." Aurora, radiant in a simple cream dress with wildflowers in her hair, replied with equally heartfelt words, "I take you, Finn Irwin, to be my husband. I promise to cherish your strength and kindness, to build our future together day by day, and to love you through all seasons, as steadfastly as these trees reach for the sky." As they exchanged rings, Finn, now wearing a simple band carved from a fallen elm branch, Judge Thornton pronounced them husband and wife. Their kiss was sweet and promising, sealed by the gentle applause of their guests and the rustling leaves of the trees they had planted together. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music from a fiddler from town, abundant food contributed by well-wishers, and dancing that continued until sunset painted the valley in gold. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, Finn led Aurora to their new cabin, larger than her original structure, with wide windows designed to catch the morning light and a deep porch that would eventually be shaded by the saplings they had planted nearby. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said softly, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Aurora laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Our home, our trees, our valley." "Everything we've planted together," Finn agreed, setting her down gently once inside. "And this is just the beginning." The years that followed proved Finn's words prophetic. Their tree-planting venture expanded steadily, transforming the landscape around Las Animas. They developed a small nursery business, growing saplings adapted to the harsh conditions of the territory, and selling them to other homesteaders and ranchers who had been inspired by their example. The railroad arrived in 1879, bringing increased commerce and settlement to the area. As Aurora had predicted, demand for timber grew, but by then, their groves were established enough to provide sustainable harvesting of certain species, while their educational efforts had convinced many locals of the importance of replanting. Their family grew alongside their forest. In the spring of 1878, Aurora gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Finn's father. A daughter, Eliza, followed 2 years later, and another son, James, in 1882. The children grew up surrounded by trees, learning to nurture seedlings almost before they could walk. By 1886, a decade after Aurora had first arrived in the valley with her wagon of saplings, the transformation was remarkable. Groves of cottonwoods, elms, oaks, and pines created islands of green throughout what had once been barren land. Wildlife returned, birds nested in the branches, deer browsed in the shadows during hot summer days, and smaller creatures found homes among the roots and undergrowth. The dam they had built expanded into a proper irrigation system, supporting not just their trees, but also the vegetable gardens and small orchards they had established. Their homestead became a model for sustainable practices in the territory, visited by agricultural students and government officials interested in reforestation. Aurora and Finn's reputation grew alongside their trees. They published pamphlets on arid land forestry, contributed articles to scientific journals, and corresponded with naturalists across the country. Aurora's father, initially dismissive of her Western adventure, eventually visited from Boston and departed impressed by what his headstrong daughter and her cowboy husband had accomplished. On a warm evening in the summer of 1886, Aurora and Finn sat on the porch of their home, now enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Their children played among the trees that formed a protective canopy around the homestead, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Do you remember," Finn asked, his arm around Aurora's shoulders, "the day we met?" Aurora smiled, leaning against him. "How could I forget? I was suspicious of the strange cowboy who appeared out of nowhere to critique my planting technique." Finn chuckled. "I was trying to impress you." "Were you now?" Aurora teased. "And here I thought you were merely concerned about my trees." "Well, that too," Finn admitted. "But mostly I was struck by this beautiful, determined woman working alone in a place where most wouldn't even try." Aurora gazed out at their transformed valley. What had once been a barren expanse was now a patchwork of green, with lines of trees following the contours of the land, sheltering areas of natural regeneration where native plants had returned once given the chance. "We've done good work here," she said softly. "We have," Finn agreed. "Though sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't ridden by that day." Aurora turned to face him, placing a hand on his cheek. "I like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are meant to be. Like us?" he asked with a smile. "Like us," she confirmed. "And like this." She gestured to their surroundings, the trees, the land, their children playing in the distance. All of it. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning new plantings and projects for the coming year. Their vision had expanded far beyond Aurora's initial dream, encompassing not just trees but a whole philosophy of land stewardship that they were passing on to their children and their community. The legacy they were creating would outlive them both, spreading shade and shelter across what had once been called a barren wasteland. But more important than the trees themselves was the love that had grown between them, a love rooted in shared purpose, mutual respect, and the daily choice to nurture what they had planted together. "I love you, Aurora Irwin," Finn said as the first stars appeared above their valley. "And I love you," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing possibility where others saw only emptiness. Thank you for teaching me that some dreams are worth fighting for," he answered, "even the ones that seem impossible." As darkness settled fully over their land, the wind carried the scent of pine and cottonwood, of rich soil and growing things. In the distance, an owl called, hunting among trees that hadn't existed a decade earlier. The sound echoed across the valley, no longer barren, but vibrant with life. Aurora and Finn sat together in the quiet, surrounded by everything they had built, listening to the peaceful rustling of leaves from thousands of trees that stood as testament to what could be accomplished when vision met perseverance, when dreams took root in unlikely soil, and when love gave strength to weather even the harshest seasons. Their story continued to unfold across the decades, as steadfast and enduring as the forest they had created. The tree folk of Las Animas became legendary in the region, their methods studied and replicated, their homestead a living example of transformation. By the turn of the century, Aurora and Finn had grandchildren playing among mature trees that had been mere saplings when their journey began. The railroad town had grown into a proper settlement, with tree-lined streets and parks designed with their consultation. The valley that had once seemed God-forsaken now stood as proof of nature's resilience when given human assistance and protection. When visitors asked how it all began, Aurora would smile and tell them about a determined young woman planting trees in a barren valley, and the cowboy who had stopped to help, offering not just his labor but his heart. "I'll water them with you," he had said on that fateful day. And together, they had nurtured not just trees, but a family, a community, and a legacy that would continue to grow long after they were gone, roots deep in the New Mexico soil, branches reaching skyward, sheltering generations yet to come. In their twilight years, Aurora and Finn would still walk among their trees each evening, hand in hand, marveling at what had grown from small beginnings. They had discovered what few are fortunate enough to learn: that love, like the trees they planted, could transform landscapes both physical and emotional, turning barrenness to abundance through patient tending and unwavering faith in what was yet to bloom. And when they finally rested beneath the boughs of their oldest cottonwood, their children and grandchildren continued their work, ensuring that the forest of Las Animas, born from one woman's vision and one man's offer of partnership, would flourish for centuries to come, a living monument to what can happen when love takes root in the most unlikely of places.